My name is Thomas William Mitchell, and until the moment I found my wife in another man's bed, I believed I was a good person. Not perfect, certainly, not without flaws, but fundamentally good in the way that matters. Honest, faithful, dependable. I had built my life on principles that I'd never questioned. Work hard, stay loyal, provide for your family, maintain your integrity. I was 38 years old, and I was about to learn that principles are worthless when they're not reciprocated. The office where I worked was a mid-sized advertising firm called Redmond & Associates, located in Boston's financial district. For 12 years, I had climbed the ladder methodically, arriving before everyone else and leaving after everyone had gone home. I was a man who understood the simple equation of success. Dedication plus competence equals reward. I had never deviated from this formula, and it had never failed me. My wife Sarah was 40 years old, though she looked younger. She had dark eyes that used to make me feel like I was the only person in the room when she looked at me. We'd met in college, married at 28, and by the time we'd been married for 14 years, I thought I understood the contract between us. I was wrong about that too. Sarah had given up her career as a graphic designer when our daughter Sophie was born 9 years ago. It was supposed to be temporary. It had become permanent. Somewhere along the way, the temporary arrangement had calcified into what felt like her permanent role. The woman who managed the house, who volunteered at Sophie's school, who maintained our social calendar and our friendships. I had been grateful for this arrangement. I had not examined it closely enough to realize what it was costing her. Or, more accurately, what she believed it was costing her. The Wednesday afternoon, when I came home early from the office, my 2 p.m. meeting had been canceled, and I decided to work from home, I found evidence of this failure. I heard the laugh first. Sarah's laugh, but not the polite, controlled laugh she used at dinner parties. This was her real laugh, the one that came from deep in her chest, the one she used to direct at me when we were young and everything was funny because we were alive. Then I heard the man's voice responding, lower register, warm, intimate. I stopped in the hallway of my own house and listened to my wife laugh with another man. The master bedroom door was slightly open. I could see movement, though not clearly. I pushed it open. The scene that greeted me will be burned into my memory until the day I die. Sarah was on my bed, our bed, the bed where we had made love and where I had held her hand through a miscarriage, and where we had slept countless nights believing in the solidity of our marriage. Partially undressed. Her blouse was off. Her bra hung loose around her waist. Her jeans were unbuttoned. Next to her was a man I didn't recognize. He was in his mid-30s, muscular in the way that comes from making your body your professional asset. Tanned, handsome in that anonymous way of gym trainers and Instagram fitness influencers. He was lying beside my wife with his hand on her bare lower back, and when he saw me, his expression changed from pleasure to mild surprise, as if I were a waiter interrupting an expensive meal. I stood in the doorway and felt something inside me crystallize. Not anger, not yet. Something colder. Something that felt like clarity. Sarah moved faster than I'd ever seen her move, scrambling off the bed, pulling her blouse over herself, her face going from flushed to white to red in rapid succession. "Tom," she started, but I held up a hand. "Get dressed," I said to the man. My voice sounded very far away, as if someone else was speaking through my body. He scrambled for his clothes, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this before, probably many times. As he dressed, I noticed details with a strange clarity. The tattoo on his shoulder, tribal-looking, generic. The scar on his ribs, something he'd probably told women an impressive story about. The confident way he tied his shoes despite the obvious awkwardness of the moment. He left without saying anything, which I appreciated. Any words would have only made it worse. I went downstairs and sat at the kitchen table. Sarah appeared a few minutes later, fully dressed, her hair disheveled, her face blotchy. I asked, not looking at her. "His name is Vincent," she said quietly. She didn't answer immediately. I looked at her directly, and in that look, I saw guilt written so clearly across her face that I didn't need her to answer. "How?" "Since September," she whispered. 4 months. That meant every time she'd told me she was going to the gym at 3 in the afternoon, she was actually going to meet this man. Every time she'd come home flushed and energized, it was because she'd been in another man's bed or apartment. Every time she'd kissed me, she was bringing the taste of betrayal into our home. "I need to leave," I said, standing up. "Tom, please." She reached for me. I pulled away from her touch as if it had burned me. Don't touch me. Don't talk to me." I left the house and drove without direction. Eventually, I found myself at a Marriott near the airport. I checked in, went to the room, and sat on the edge of the bed for hours without moving. That night, as I stared at the ceiling in that anonymous hotel room, something shifted in me. The shock was giving way to something else, something darker, something that felt like purpose. I was not a man who believed in revenge. I had always considered it beneath me, the refuge of people who had been broken and wanted to break something back. But lying in that hotel bed, I realized I was wrong about that too. Revenge wasn't beneath me. Revenge was the only language that made sense anymore. Before I could plan my revenge, I needed to understand who Sarah really was. Because the woman I'd married didn't match the woman I'd found in my bed with another man. Or perhaps she did, and I had simply been blind. I spent the next few days in methodical reflection, reviewing our marriage through the lens of this new knowledge. And as I looked back, I began to see patterns I had previously ignored or rationalized away. Sarah's cruelty had always been there. I just hadn't wanted to see it. 3 years into our marriage, when I was still climbing the ladder at Redmond & Associates, I came home one evening to discover that Sarah had given away my collection of vintage vinyl records to a charity donation center. I had collected those records since I was a teenager. They represented memories, milestones, the evolution of my taste in music. When I asked her why she'd done it, her response was casual, dismissive. They were taking up space in the living room, and they looked tacky. Not an apology, not even an acknowledgement that she'd violated my property and my trust. Just a dismissal of my feelings as unreasonable. And then, more importantly, she'd said, "Besides, I've been thinking we should redecorate the living room. Something more upscale. The Victorian furniture you like is dated." The subtext was clear. Your things don't matter. What matters is how our house looks to other people. When Sophie was born, Sarah had decided within days that she hated motherhood. Not in the way that many new mothers experience postpartum depression or the overwhelming weight of responsibility. She hated it because it interfered with her leisure time, because she had to stay home instead of going to brunches with her friends, because pregnancy had changed her body. I would come home from work to find her sitting in the living room, often in the same clothes she'd worn the day before, scrolling through her phone, while Sophie cried in the bassinet. When I asked if everything was okay, Sarah would snap at me. "I did what I was supposed to do. I had the baby. I gave you a daughter." This was the woman who had supposedly given up her career to be a mother. But she hadn't given anything up. She'd simply relocated her resentment, and she had made it clear that she expected compensation for this act of supposed sacrifice. The compensation came in the form of money and status. When I made my first significant raise, an increase of $15,000 a year, I came home excited, expecting Sarah to share in my accomplishment. When I told her approximately $10,000, she immediately had a list. A new car, her BMW was 3 years old and embarrassing. New jewelry, her friends had better pieces, and a membership at an exclusive country club, because apparently our current social circle was insufficient. She didn't celebrate my achievement. She celebrated the opportunity my achievement represented to elevate her status. When I was promoted to senior account executive 6 years into my marriage, the party Sarah threw to celebrate was ostensibly for me. But it became immediately clear that it was actually for her, an opportunity to display her wealth, her taste, her position as the wife of a successful man. She hired a caterer. She commissioned a florist to create elaborate arrangements. She bought a new dress, an expensive one that she mentioned the price of approximately 17 times that evening. And throughout the party, she positioned herself as my accomplishment, the beautiful wife who had supported me through my career while she sacrificed her own. People would approach me to congratulate me on my promotion, and before I could respond, Sarah would insert herself into the conversation, talking about how difficult it had been for her to manage the household and raise Sophie while supporting my ambitions. "He would never have made it without me," she said to one colleague's wife. "I basically built his career by freeing him up to focus on work." What she didn't mention was that I had hired a nanny to help with Sophie. What she didn't mention was that I had handled most of Sophie's care myself, reading bedtime stories, attending school conferences, teaching her to ride a bike. What she didn't mention was that her primary contribution to my career advancement was staying out of my way and spending the money I earned. The real crack in the facade came about a year before the affair. I had been passed over for a partnership opportunity at the firm. It wasn't a rejection of my work. My supervisor made clear that my performance was excellent. It was simply a matter of timing and politics. Herbert Redmond, the founder, had decided to promote his nephew instead of me. The nephew was less qualified but better connected. It was one of those moments where you realize that hard work and merit don't always translate to success. Sometimes luck and connections matter more. I came home and told Sarah about it. I was disappointed, but I was trying to remain positive, focusing on the fact that there would be other opportunities. Sarah's response was immediate and brutal. She said, her voice taking on an edge I had never heard before. "It's complicated," I said. Sarah laughed, but it wasn't a laugh of sympathy or understanding. It was a laugh of contempt. "Apparently, he's the decision maker," I said, trying to keep my tone even. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Sarah said, standing up and beginning to pace. "You get comfortable at that firm, and you stop pushing yourself." "I am excellent," I said quietly. Sarah demanded. "Because from where I'm sitting, the issue is that you're not ambitious enough. The issue is that I didn't go to the right school, and I don't have the right connections. So, fix it," Sarah said coldly. "Get the right connections, change schools. I don't know. But don't come home and tell me you've been passed over like it's some kind of disappointment we have to accept together. We're not going to accept it. Sarah, this kind of thing takes time." "I don't care," she interrupted. "Do you know how embarrassing this is for me? Do you know what I have to tell my friends? That my husband has a good job but wasn't successful enough to make partner? At my book club last week, Michelle's husband just made senior vice president, and Patricia's husband closed a deal for $3 million, and I have to sit there and talk about your little disappointment?" She sat back down and looked at me with such contempt that I barely recognized her. She continued, "It's not talent, it's motivation. It's the willingness to push yourself beyond what's comfortable." The words hit deeper than any physical blow could have. She wasn't comforting me in a moment of disappointment. She was shaming me, and more importantly, she was making clear that my value in her eyes was directly tied to my professional success and financial status. "I'm sorry I've disappointed you," I said finally. "I'm sorry too," she replied. "I married the right person at the wrong time in his career." I remember that moment with perfect clarity, It was the moment I understood that Sarah didn't love me. She had married an idea of what I could become, and now that idea was being threatened, she was abandoning it, and, by extension, abandoning me. About 2 months after this conversation, Sarah became interested in going to the gym. She'd never been particularly athletic. We had a treadmill at home that she'd used perhaps half a dozen times before deciding it was boring. But suddenly, she was going to the gym 3 times a week. Always in the afternoon. Always for about 2 hours. "I'm trying to get in better shape," she told me. "I want to look better." She would come home from the gym, flush and energized, her hair wet from the shower, a strange smile on her face. And I, fool that I was actually pleased. I thought she was finally investing in her own health and happiness. I thought perhaps this was a sign that things between us were improving. Instead, it was a sign that she was finding validation elsewhere. The affair started because Sarah needed to feel wanted by someone who seemed more successful, more confident, more virile than her disappointed husband. Vincent Cross, with his perfect body and his Instagram following and his air of casual success, represented everything I wasn't in that moment. A man who hadn't failed, a man who seemed to have his life figured out, a man who looked at her with hunger and desire instead of hurt and disappointment. He was a fantasy, and Sarah chose the fantasy over reality. By the next morning, I had made decisions that would alter the course of my life and the lives of 3 other people. I would not divorce my wife immediately. I would not confront her with rage and threats. Instead, I would use the only tools I had: intelligence, access, and the ability to think several moves ahead. But before I planned my revenge, I needed to understand Sarah's true nature. Because perhaps I had been blind. Perhaps I had ignored signs of her materialism and cruelty because I wanted to believe in the marriage we had built. I opened my laptop and began reviewing our credit card statements, something I had the right to do as a joint account holder. What I found made my blood run cold. Sarah had been spending money with a purpose and pattern I had never understood. Over the past year, she had spent approximately $8,000 on clothing. Not for Sophie, not for our home, but for herself. This wasn't occasional shopping, this was systematic acquisition. New dresses, new shoes, new jewelry, all designed to make her look younger, more attractive, more desirable. She'd also spent $3,000 on cosmetic procedures, Botox injections, a chemical peel, teeth whitening treatments. All of this had been done without consulting me. All of it had been charged to accounts I paid for. But here's what was most revealing. Most of this spending had started in June, about 3 months before the affair had begun. Sarah hadn't started going to the gym because she wanted to be healthy. She had started going to the gym because she was trying to become someone new, someone who could attract a man like Vincent Cross. I called my bank and reviewed our account activity for the past 3 years. The pattern was unmistakable. Every time I failed to achieve something Sarah thought I should achieve, her spending increased. When I didn't make partner in my late 30s, she bought a new wardrobe. When my last raise wasn't as substantial as she'd hoped, she began regular visits to a salon. It wasn't a woman investing in her own health and happiness. It was a woman shopping for a new version of herself, because she'd decided her current version, the one married to Tom, wasn't good enough. I then pulled up her email account, something I had access to as her emergency contact, and began to scan through her messages. What I found shocked me, though perhaps it shouldn't have. There were chains of messages between Sarah and her friends discussing me, not in the supportive way that friends discuss their husbands, but in a contemptuous way. From Sarah to Michelle, the one whose husband made senior vice president. Tom came home all depressed about being passed over for partner again. I had to sit there and listen to him talk about how unfair it was, as if the world owes him success. From Sarah to Patricia. You're so lucky that your husband is successful. Mine is stuck in middle management and seems content to stay there. I don't know how much longer I can keep supporting his mediocrity. From Sarah to another friend named Jennifer. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I'd made different choices, if I'd married someone more driven. The cruelty was systematic. She had been discussing my failures and inadequacies with her friends for years. She had been positioning herself as a long-suffering woman trapped in a mediocre marriage to a mediocre man. What struck me most was that none of this was true. I was doing well at my firm. I was making good money. I was a decent person, a good father, a faithful husband. But to Sarah, I was never going to be enough because I was not part of the elite circle she wanted to join. She didn't want me. She wanted what having me could give her. Then I found something that made everything clear. There was an email exchange between Sarah and Vincent that had been forwarded to her Gmail account. Apparently, they had been using external email to communicate so that the messages wouldn't show up on our home server. From Sarah. Yeah, he's always working. It's the only thing he cares about, and he's not even good at it. Last year, he didn't make partner, and he was devastated. From Vincent. That sucks, but hey, you look amazing. From Sarah. I've been thinking about leaving him, but honestly, I'm terrified. I don't know if I can support myself and Sophie on my own. At least with Tom, I have security. This was the most revealing conversation of all. Sarah wasn't having an affair because she was unhappy in the marriage. She was having an affair because she wanted to keep her options open. She wanted the security of being married to me while also having the excitement of Vincent. She wanted to hedge her bets, stay with the reliable provider while auditioning for the passionate lover. And she was willing to humiliate me, to betray me, to put our marriage and our daughter's emotional stability at risk, all so that she could keep both options available. This wasn't love. This wasn't even the result of a marriage breaking down due to mutual failure. This was calculated opportunism. This was a woman who had decided that she deserved better than what she had, and she was going to take it, regardless of who got hurt in the process. Now, finally, I understood what I was dealing with. Not a woman who had made a mistake, not a woman who had acted impulsively, but a woman who had planned and executed a betrayal with cold calculation, all while presenting herself to me as a grateful, supportive partner. I called my office and told them I was dealing with a personal matter and would be working from home. Then I opened my laptop and began the systematic work of finding out everything there was to know about Vincent Cross. It took less than 3 hours. Vincent Cross, age 34, worked at Redmond Fitness as a personal trainer. He had 3,200 followers on Instagram, mostly women who commented about how inspirational he was. His website advertised personal training services at $75 per hour. His apartment was in Dorchester, a modest building in a neighborhood that was gentrifying but not yet gentrified. His car was a 2019 Tesla Model 3, expensive enough to look impressive, affordable enough to suggest he was financing it. His income, based on my conservative estimates, was probably around $45,000 to $55,000 a year before taxes. After taxes, he was probably taking home around $35,000 to $40,000 annually. He was a man of moderate means who had presented himself to my wife as something grander. But more importantly, he was vulnerable. And vulnerable men could be destroyed. I spent the next week in a state of meticulous planning. I hired a private investigator named Frank DeLuca, who specialized in infidelity cases. I asked him not just to document the affair, but to find everything that could be used. Frank was very good at his job. Within 2 weeks, I had a detailed dossier on Vincent Cross. He had debts, 9% interest rate. He had credit card debt exceeding $18,000. He had been late on his rent twice in the past year. He had taken out a personal loan to pay for a certification course. In short, Vincent Cross was exactly what he appeared to be: a moderately successful personal trainer who lived right at the edge of his means and would be devastated by any significant financial disruption. But I wasn't just going to destroy Vincent. He was a symptom. Sarah was the disease. I began my work on two fronts simultaneously. The first prong was directed at Vincent. I documented his client list and began a systematic campaign to contact his clients through fake social media accounts. I left negative reviews on fitness websites. I questioned his credentials and his knowledge. I created doubt about his legitimacy and safety. Within 6 weeks, I had watched Vincent's client list shrink by almost 40%. He had lost 6 clients, and several others had downgraded from twice-weekly sessions to once-weekly. His income had dropped from approximately $3,500 a month to approximately $2,100 a month. This was only the beginning. Next, I created fraudulent charges on accounts connected to Vincent's financial life. Small charges at first, $50 here, $75 there, all using stolen credit card numbers sourced from the dark web. Over the course of 2 weeks, I had initiated 17 fraudulent charges across multiple accounts totaling approximately $2,000. By mid-January, Vincent's credit score had dropped from 720 to 580. The damage was done. But the second prong of my attack was far more important. It was directed at Sarah. The second prong was directed at Sarah because Sarah had made the choice. Vincent was just a symptom of what was already broken in our marriage. Sarah had decided to seek attention elsewhere. Sarah had risked our family. Sarah had committed the ultimate betrayal. And most importantly, Sarah cared only about money. If that was what mattered to her, then I would use that fact against her. I didn't confront my wife about the affair. I didn't demand answers or threaten divorce. Instead, I became the perfect husband. I came home on time. I asked about her day. I was attentive and present in a way I hadn't been in years. Sarah, confused by this sudden change, seemed to relax into it. She stopped going to the gym in the afternoons. She stopped taking calls on her phone. Whatever thing with Vincent had been, it seemed to have ended naturally once reality intruded. I was patient. I was careful. I was waiting for the partnership offer from Herbert Redmond. It came in late December, exactly as I'd been hoping it would. Herbert called me into his office and offered me 25% of the firm. The numbers were staggering. Approximately $3 million in equity, with annual income potential of $400,000 to $500,000 per year. I accepted graciously. I signed the paperwork. I became a wealthy man. I told Sarah that very evening. I watched her face light up as she understood what the numbers meant. $1 million, maybe more. Everything she'd dreamed about. "This is incredible," she said, pulling me into an embrace. "You did it." But what she meant was, "We're rich now. This is what I wanted." I held her and said nothing, because I had already made my decision. The next morning, before she woke up, I called my lawyer. The divorce proceedings began in January, but I did it carefully. I didn't tell Sarah I was divorcing her. Not yet. First, I needed to move my assets into structures that would be protected in the divorce. I established a trust in my name. I transferred my new partnership equity into corporate entities. I moved liquid assets into accounts that were more difficult to trace. When I finally told her, in mid-January, that I had hired a lawyer and was proceeding with the divorce, she was shocked, she said. "They were," I said coldly. "For me." "I don't understand," she said. "You had an affair," I said. "With a man named Vincent Cross, for 4 months, in my house, in our bed." The blood drained from her face. She whispered, "Since December," I said. "I've been waiting. Tom, please." She reached for me. "Don't," I said, pulling away. "My lawyer will contact yours. I want this resolved quickly and quietly. If you cooperate, I'll be generous." My lawyer, Richard Castellano, was very good at what he did. Over the course of the next 4 months, we structured the divorce to my advantage. Because I'd been careful with my asset transfer, the newly acquired partnership interest was deemed to be my separate property. I had earned it through my own work, and it hadn't been acquired during the marriage. The trust I'd established was protected. The corporate entities were shielded. What Sarah received was relatively modest. The house, which still had a mortgage, primary custody of Sophie, and $500 per month in spousal support for 5 years. No share of the partnership, no share of my new wealth. She was devastated, not because she had lost a husband, but because she had lost access to the money. The reaction confirmed everything I had suspected. Sarah had never loved me. She had loved what I could provide. She called me in tears, pleading for more money. I told her it was final. She asked if we could reconcile. I told her no. She tried to convince me that the partnership earnings should be split. My lawyer shut that down. But the real destruction wasn't in the divorce settlement. It was in what happened next. By March, Vincent Cross was in serious financial trouble. The fraudulent charges on his accounts had been resolved, but not before they'd damaged his credit significantly. His credit score, which had been in the 720 range, had dropped to 580. This meant that he couldn't get approved for anything. Credit cards, car loans, an apartment lease. His gym job barely covered his expenses. His Tesla payment was $500 a month. His rent was $900. His insurance and utilities and food consumed the remainder of his income. He was living month to month with no margin for error. When his Tesla broke down in April, a problem with the transmission that cost $200 to repair, he couldn't afford to fix it. He couldn't afford a new car. He couldn't get financing because his credit was destroyed. He tried to sell the Tesla, but he still owed more on it than it was worth. He asked the gym owner if he could take a loan against future earnings. The answer was no. He was, for the first time in his adult life, trapped. But I wasn't done with him yet. I had Frank conduct some additional research. It turned out that Vincent had been sending money to his mother, who lived in New Jersey and was dealing with some health issues. He'd been helping with her medical bills. This meant he had a weak point. He cared about something beyond his own comfort. I didn't use that information directly. Instead, I did something more elegant. I created a fake lawsuit. Using contacts I had in the legal field, I had a colleague generate official-looking legal documents claiming that Vincent had been involved in a car accident in 2019, which he had been, I'd found records of it, and that the statute of limitations for a civil suit had just expired. The lawsuit was technically invalid, but it looked official. It had a case number, it had a judge's name, it had all the markers of legitimacy. The lawsuit claimed $50,000 in damages for the accident. Damages that didn't actually exist, but the documents didn't reveal that. I had it served to him at the gym. Vincent's panic was almost immediate. According to Frank, who was monitoring him, he spent 3 days making phone calls to lawyers. He hired one, paid a $1,500 retainer, only to discover that the lawsuit was a fabrication, a fake document with an invalid case number that didn't correspond to any actual court. But by that point, he'd spent the money he didn't have. In May, Vincent missed a rent payment. His landlord began eviction proceedings. He tried to get another job, but his credit issues followed him. Background checks revealed the fraud disputes and the financial instability. Employers were hesitant to hire someone in that much financial distress. By June, he was facing eviction. He reached out to Sarah. According to Frank, who had kept monitoring both of them, he showed up at her house crying, asking for help. He needed money. He was going to lose his apartment. Could she help him? Sarah, who had become much colder in the months since the divorce, turned him away. Whatever had been between them was gone. She was dealing with her own financial struggles, trying to manage the house on $500 a month spousal support while paying for Sophie's school and her own living expenses. By September, Vincent was homeless. He was sleeping in his car, the Tesla that he couldn't sell and couldn't afford to fix. He'd been fired from the gym because he couldn't maintain a professional appearance when he was living in a car. His mother in New Jersey was worried about him. His friends had mostly distanced themselves. By October, he'd driven to New Jersey to live with his mother. His social media went dark. His website was taken down. Vincent Cross, for all practical purposes, had ceased to exist as a person of consequence. I watched it all happen from a distance, and I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not triumph, just a cold sense of completion. I had done what I set out to do. I had destroyed him, but Vincent was only half of what I needed to destroy. Sarah was the primary target because Sarah had made the choice. Vincent was just a symptom of what was already broken in our marriage. Sarah had decided to seek attention elsewhere. Sarah had risked our family. Sarah had committed the ultimate betrayal. And more importantly, Sarah had revealed that she cared about nothing but money. The divorce settlement I'd negotiated left her with the house, but the house was a liability. The mortgage was still $180,000. Property taxes in Brookline were $8,000 a year. Insurance and maintenance were additional costs. With only $1,100 a month in spousal support and no job, she couldn't afford it. I knew this. I'd factored it in deliberately. Within 6 months of the divorce being finalized, Sarah was struggling. She tried to pick up freelance graphic design work, but she'd been out of the industry for 9 years. Her portfolio was dated. Her software skills were rusty. She was only able to get small projects that paid maybe $500, $1,000 each. By February of the following year, she was running late on her property taxes. By March, she had received a notice that the house would be foreclosed if she didn't catch up. She reached out to me, asking if I could help. I told her I couldn't. Our divorce settlement was final. Spousal support was the limit of my obligation, which was technically true, but not the whole truth. The truth was that I was intentionally allowing her to suffer because I wanted her to suffer. And I was particularly satisfied knowing that she was suffering because of the very thing she had prized above all else: money. She had betrayed me for the possibility of a better life. And now I was ensuring she had a worse one. In April, she reached out again. This time, she was desperate. The foreclosure was happening. She needed $15,000 to catch up on back taxes and bring the mortgage current. Without it, she was going to lose everything. "Tom, please," she said over the phone, and I could hear the tears in her voice. "I know what I did. I know I betrayed you. But please, don't let me lose the house. Sophie is already dealing with the divorce." "I'm sorry," I said. And the strange part is I was sorry. I was sorry that I was this person. But I was also not going to help her. By May, she had lost the house. She and Sophie moved into a small apartment in a less expensive part of Boston. The apartment was a one-bedroom, meaning Sophie and Sarah shared a room. There was mold on the ceiling of the bathroom. The landlord didn't respond to maintenance requests. Sarah's financial situation continued to deteriorate. By July, she was struggling to pay for Sophie's school. By August, she'd had to pull Sophie out and enroll her in the public school system. Sophie, who had been dealing with the divorce as well as a 12-year-old could, now had to deal with the complete dissolution of her mother's life. I watched this happen from my new house in Cambridge, a beautiful brownstone that I'd purchased with cash. I watched Sarah's situation deteriorate from a distance, and I felt the cold satisfaction of someone who had executed a plan perfectly. By fall, Sarah was working 2 jobs, freelance design work from home and part-time retail at a clothing store in a mall. She was making approximately $2,200 a month, minus her share of Sophie's expenses, which meant she had maybe $400 a month for everything else after rent and utilities. She was barely surviving. What made this particularly poetic was that Sarah had been destroyed by the very thing she had valued above all else. She had betrayed me in pursuit of a wealthier, more exciting life. And now she was trapped in a life of financial precarity and desperation. Money had been her god, and money had become her nemesis. In November, a mutual acquaintance, someone from our old neighborhood, ran into Sarah at the grocery store. The person told me about the encounter. Sarah had been buying the cheapest items available, rice and beans and chicken that was on sale. She looked thin. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who had been systematically broken down. The acquaintance told me that Sarah had asked about me, about how I was doing. When told that I'd gotten my partnership and was doing very well, Sarah had gone very quiet. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when she understood that the only thing that had separated her from everything she wanted was her own betrayal. If she had been patient, if she had been loyal, if she had believed in me and supported me instead of chasing the fantasy of a gym trainer, she would be living in the house. She would be driving a nice car. She would be the wife of a wealthy man. Instead, she was alone in a 1-bedroom apartment, working 2 jobs, unable to afford food, watching her daughter struggle. She had made a calculation that she wanted better, and that calculation had destroyed her. It took a few months for Sarah to reach out, but I knew she would. Desperation has a way of pushing people toward decisions they swore they'd never make. It was January, exactly 1 year after the divorce had been finalized, when I received an email from her. I opened it and read the message. "Tom, I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything. I know that what I did was unforgivable, but I'm struggling, and Sophie is struggling, and I don't know what else to do. Would you be willing to meet with me? Please, just to talk." I didn't respond immediately. I sat with the email for a few days, savoring the moment. This was the culmination of everything I'd worked toward. I eventually agreed to meet her at a coffee shop in Cambridge, near my office. When she arrived, I barely recognized her. Sarah had aged 10 years and 12 months. She was thin, not in a healthy way, but in the way that comes from not eating enough. Her hair was dull. Her clothes were worn. She looked like a woman who had been broken. "Hi," she said, sitting across from me at a small table. She wrapped her hands around a coffee cup. Just water, I noticed, not even a coffee. She couldn't even afford to buy a beverage. "Sarah," I said, looking at her with the clinical distance of a scientist observing a specimen. "I know this is difficult," she said. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see." I asked, though I already knew. "Financial trouble," she said. "Serious financial trouble. I lost the house. Sophie and I are in this terrible apartment. I'm working 2 jobs and I'm still not making enough to cover everything." She paused, and I could see her struggling with what to say next. "I heard that you made partner," she continued, "that you're very successful now, and I thought maybe you would help me." "Just enough to get back on my feet?" I asked. "I don't know, 20,000, 30,000? I took a sip of my coffee and looked at her directly. "No," I said. "No, I'm not going to help you. You made your choice. You had an affair. You risked your marriage and your family. Tom, please." She reached toward me. I pulled my hand back. I don't feel sympathy for you, Sarah. I feel contempt. You destroyed our marriage for a man who was using you, and then, when he was no longer useful, he abandoned you, just like I knew he would. That's not fair, she said, her voice breaking. I'm being honest, I said. You wanted excitement. You wanted to feel wanted. You wanted to escape the life we'd built together. Well, now you have your escape. I stood up to leave. Wait, she said desperately. Please. I sat back down, curious about what could possibly matter at this point. I know what you did, she said quietly. My stomach tightened. I know about Vincent, what happened to him, the credit card fraud, the fake lawsuit, all of it. I said nothing. You destroyed his life, she said, and you destroyed mine. You destroyed your own life, I said coldly. I simply didn't interfere with your fall. Vincent destroyed his own life the moment he decided to sleep with a married woman. She stared at me, and I could see something change in her face. The last bit of hope drained away. She asked quietly, "It's that I deserve this. That's what makes it unbearable. I know I deserve it. I betrayed you. I betrayed Sophie." For a moment, I felt something crack inside me. A flash of the man I used to be, a man who would have felt sympathy for her situation. A man who would have helped, despite everything. But I pushed that feeling down. "I have to go," I said, standing up. "Tom, wait." She reached for my arm. "Is there anything I can do?" I looked at her hand on my arm, at the way her fingers trembled, at the desperation in her face. And I thought about all the times she had told her friends that I was mediocre. All the times she had made clear that my value to her was tied directly to my financial success. All the times she had shown me contempt because I hadn't achieved enough. Now I had achieved, and the only person who couldn't share in that success was her. "No," I said, "there's nothing." I left the coffee shop and didn't look back. What I didn't tell Sarah was that my life had moved on in ways she couldn't imagine. In the months after the divorce, I'd put myself back together. I'd gone to therapy. I'd worked out at the gym. I'd become someone new, or perhaps I'd become the person I was always meant to be. And then, in September, I'd met someone. Her name was Rachel, and she was nothing like Sarah. Rachel was a lawyer, independent, successful in her own right. She didn't need my money. She didn't depend on me for identity or purpose. She was exactly who she was, with or without me. We met at a restaurant in Boston. I was there with colleagues from the firm. She was there with friends. We made eye contact across the room, and something passed between us that felt electric. By November, we were dating. By December, I knew I was going to marry her. Rachel knew about my divorce. I told her the basics. My wife had an affair, we'd separated, I'd become more successful afterward. I didn't tell her about the elaborate revenge scheme I'd orchestrated. That was something I kept to myself. What surprised me was how much better my life became once I stopped being consumed by anger. Rachel was kind without being weak. She was successful without needing to diminish anyone else. She loved me without needing me to prove my worth through money or status. And most importantly, she loved me because of who I was, not because of what I had. We got married in June, in a small ceremony with close friends and family. I sent Sophie an invitation, and she came. She was 16 now, and she'd grown into a thoughtful, observant young woman who'd learned to navigate her parents' dysfunction with a grace I didn't deserve. "She seems nice," Sophie said to me after the ceremony, referring to Rachel. "She is," I said. Sophie asked, in that direct way teenagers sometimes have. "Yes," I said, and I realized it was true. I was happy, not in the way I had been happy with Sarah, That had been the happiness of illusion, of believing in something that didn't exist. This was the happiness of actual connection, actual reciprocity. Rachel and I settled into a beautiful life in Cambridge. We traveled, we built a home together. We didn't talk about the past. We focused on the present and the future. I continued to be successful at work. The firm expanded. My wealth increased. By the time I was 45, I was worth approximately $15 million. But the money mattered less than it ever had. What mattered was that I had a wife who loved me for who I was, not what I had. What mattered was that my daughter and I had rebuilt our relationship into something genuine. What mattered was that I had become a person I could respect. It took me years to process what I'd done to Sarah and Vincent. It took me even longer to understand that in destroying them, I had been destroying a part of myself. Doctor, I sat with that question for a long time before answering. No, I said finally. The revenge felt good in the moment. It felt like justice, but it wasn't justice. It was just damage. I damaged a man who was probably a victim of his own limitations, just as much as I was a victim of my wife's choices, Dr. Chen asked. Yes, I said, but not in the way that matters. I'm sorry for the harm I caused, but I'm not sorry that I moved on. I'm not sorry that I found someone better. Those are different things, she said. I know that now, I said. Sarah reached out to me again, this time in a letter, not in person. The letter was forwarded to me by my lawyer and I almost didn't read it, but something made me open it. The letter was brief. Tom, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. I've built a life without your help. It's not much, but it's mine. I've rebuilt my design business. I have an apartment I can actually afford. Sophie is in college now, on a scholarship, and she's thriving. I wanted you to know that I'm okay, that we're okay. I also wanted to tell you that I understand now what you did. I know about Vincent, about the fraud, about the deliberate destruction. A detective friend of Sophie's boyfriend helped me piece it together. I could pursue it legally, but I won't. That's not who I want to be. What I want is to tell you that I've learned something from all of this. I learned that betrayal destroys the betrayer as much as it destroys the betrayed. And I learned that redemption is possible, even when you think it isn't. I know I valued money more than I valued you. I know I was cruel to you in ways that were calculated and deliberate. I know I made a choice that destroyed our marriage and nearly destroyed our daughter. But I also know that what you did to me, and what you did to Vincent, was darker than what I did to you, and I've had to come to terms with the fact that I drove you to it. I hope you're happy, Tom. I hope your new wife makes you happy in a way that I couldn't. I hope that you find peace with what you did, because carrying that kind of darkness is a burden. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did to you. I'm sorry for the pain I caused. And I'm sorry that you felt like you had to destroy people to heal yourself. Maybe someday, we can both let go of all of this. Sarah. I read the letter 3 times, and on the 3rd reading, I felt something break open inside me. Not the cold thing that had been living in my chest for the past 5 years. Something else. Something that felt like the first step toward genuine healing. I didn't respond to the letter. There was nothing to say that would make sense to her. But I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I thought about forgiveness. Not forgiveness of Sarah. That felt too loaded, too complicated. But forgiveness of myself. Acceptance of the fact that I had been a man consumed by rage, and that man had done terrible things. That evening, I told Rachel about the letter. She asked. I don't know, I said honestly. Rachel asked. I don't know, I said again. But the truth is, I knew the answer. I was finally, truly beginning to move on. I had spent 5 years destroying people to prove something to myself. And what I had learned was that destruction never proves what you think it will. It just creates more damage, more pain, more things to regret. I had become successful. I had become wealthy. I had become remarried to a woman I loved. But I had also become someone who had orchestrated the downfall of others, and that was a price I would carry forever. The ending of this story isn't triumphant. It's just the moment when someone finally admits that revenge was never really what they needed. What they needed was to become someone worth being.